Morning guys, so we're outside the home of Helen Hamilton, who is our Melbourne kitchen crash. It's her son James's 11th birthday today, so we're here to surprise him and bake his cake and have fun with him and his little brother Thomas. So let's go and say hello to them. Good morning! Hello! How are you? I'm good! Nice to see you too! Hi! Hello! Happy birthday! Oh.
Cake to the Rescue's kitchen crash, take one.
Hey guys, so we're here finally at the kitchen crash in Melbourne after our weekend in the Yarra Valley, and I'm super excited that we're here with the lovely Helen Hamilton. She's been with us. She has a dog. She has been with us for a long time, quite a few years now. And when we contacted Helen as one of the applicants for Kitchen Crash, it just turned out that it was James's 11th birthday today. Happy birthday! And so we thought we have to come and help James to bake his birthday cake. So he has chosen the army tank. This is what we've been waiting to. It's the new version today. The reason a new version is that later on this week we are going to be releasing options for cakes for kids with allergies, and so we needed to take some of the things out of this cake that weren't going to be good for those kids that need their cake to be a bit more special. So we are making our new army tank today. We are super excited and we are ready to go! So kitchen crash! Woo! So guys, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to flatten the top of our cake. I know we get lots of inquiries about how much cake to take off and whether you need to flatten it entirely, and sometimes people's cakes rise really flat and sometimes they rise a bit more. So I'm going to show you what we would do with this one here today. So the first thing to do is, it shouldn't really have stuck much to the edge, but we generally take it off just so that if you've got any tiny little catches or anything like that, you catch them off. And then you're going to peel down the side, and I'll peel down this one.
Oh yeah.
That's it. Perfect. Now what we also do is you take your knife, and you could just take it off, but it's better if you just run the knife round, just keep it nice and flat. It just takes it away from the bottom.
Don't cut your fingers.
Don't cut your fingers. And just check, and you can see that that's loosened off. Okay. So you can see it's got this dome on it. If we were to cut it really flat right down here, you'd lose an awful lot of cake. And because we're going to flip the cake over, it doesn't really matter. So we really only need to take this top bit off here and create a landing ground so that the cake sits flush when it goes over. If you're worried about on the other side having gaps, you just fill them in with icing, so it's not a problem at all. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're just going to come in here, and I just hold the top, and it's not really, the first one, it doesn't really matter if you get it super straight or not, because you can correct it. So these are the eating parts. And you can see that that was already pretty much enough. I know it's got a slope here, but you really don't need to worry about it.
I love this cake.
It's so good.
It's the best part.
The best part.
I'm telling you, I'll finish this by the end of this. Then you won't have room for your birthday cake.
There we go.
I'll have plenty of room.
So that's it all fun, and that's actually enough. So I'm going to show you it flipped over now. So now when you flip it over, you can see that you do have these curved edges. Sometimes they're cut off when you make the cake, and sometimes they just get filled in with icing. But we've really not wasted too much cake that way, and it's still got a lot of nice height about it. Okay, so now we're going to look at cutting our template. You can see that by putting up the other side, you've now got a nice smooth surface. It's going to be a lot easier to ice than the cut surface. And also, you can see that you've got your nice corners. So for something like this tank, by placing it on here, we're literally able to just cut a line along here. So, we're going to get James to do that one. The best thing to do, James, is to hold it up high.
Okay.
Yeah.
What, like that?
Yeah, up like this. Yeah. And then you can just cut down and along and down to the end and make sure all the way through. Get that bit. We'll do one more bit here, a little bit deeper. There we go. And you can see that that cuts perfectly through.
That's nice.
And we've now got the base section. So now we've got our top section, and we're going to put this one on. Again, since you want these nice strong corners and they're easier to ice, just place it right in the corner. If you place it here, you're going to give yourself another cut edge. So you can just pop it right on here, and then we'll turn it around to make it easier for you. Generally, I would hold it like this. The reason being is that if you hold it on an angle, you have a habit of sloping it. Whereas if it stays up high and you just do little steps, you can get around all the corners and all the parts. That's it. And just watch your fingers, nice and slow. And that bit, and down and off the side. And you're done.
Yeah.
Perfect. You can also see that you often then get that little bit at the bottom, and it's just there, and you can just go around like that and take the clean off, and we have a nice clean edge. And we are ready to go. So the next thing that we need to do for our tank is that we actually need to create the little curve on the front, so that when you see the tracks on the side, they've got that circular look about them. So the way that we're going to do that is to curve this front. And I know it probably feels really intimidating, but the best thing to do about it is to just do really small amounts. And once you see me do it, it'll be like, oh, okay. The biggest thing is if you take off too much at the start, you can't put it back on. But if you take off a little bit at a time, then you can always take off a little bit more. So we're going to hold it on an angle like this and take the edge off first. And we don't have to create a really massive curve because obviously it's just the curve that's on the side of the track. So we do that, and then you can take another one. And it's basically about holding your knife on this angle. It's about having that angle that you take it on. So you can see we've created the curve part here, and then again. So basically you're doing the same job. So every time you create a little point, you just take that point off. And you can see that that's just enough. And so now I just want to take that bit off.
And so you use that edge because it's less crumbs than if you use
No,
this
because
edge?
it's not square, so it's like a fat rectangle.
Okay.
And so it's just the rectangular edge.
It
So
looks curved.
yeah, so you can, and you see how I'm taking the most minuscule amounts off it. You're really not taking that much off. And that's why it's better just to take little bits. And you can kind of then just do it roughly with your knife. And that kind of creates just enough of a curve. So you can see there's just enough of a curve on this edge that it feels like it's rounded, but not so much. So we might give your mum a shot at that. What do you think?
Okay.
No pressure, Helen.
Get off, dog.
Holy
Please.
moly.
You're silly.
It's quite easy to do once you kind of see how to do
once
it.
here.
And you can see, and that's probably just about enough. I would take maybe one more run off here, really, really thin, just a tiny, to create the top of the curve, and then you're kind of done enough. So when we do this top part, you can see that we talked about this curve that doesn't matter on the top, on the bottom, but it clearly does matter on the top. So we're going to turn it over and cut it flat. So just turn it over and run down. And just test it off a bit. You can still see it's pretty. There we go. So that's us got our flat turret. Now this is the last part. We want to create this sloped front on here, so that you've got that front part there. So we're going to put it back on, fold it up, so you can see where the slope is. You could also cut it out, but for me it's quicker just fold it up. And then you put a line in so you can see where it is. And then we turn it on its side again. And you just cut down the line of the slope, and that just creates the slope there. Now you can just then trim it a little bit more. Again, less is more, so that you can get it straight. So you take a bit off first, and then you can just keep taking a bit more until you can see that you're happy with it. And then this sits at the back. Trim that bit off. And we have our shape ready to go.
Lou could be a hairdresser.
Okay, so now it's time to ice the cake and find out a little bit more about James. So as you can see, I've already placed a big blob of icing on the top. I always do that first and ice the entire top of the cake. By having the great big blob on it, you can see that we can push it around. It never really stands a chance of getting crumbs in it. because there's such a large blob of icing on it. And then it allows you to do the sides. So you can see that we've already really easily, it's an easy shape though, I guarantee, but we've already iced the top of the cake, catch that bit, and it's already nice and clean. So you're turning 11 today.
Uh-huh.
Wow, what did you get for your birthday?
I got some Yu-Gi-Oh cards and some long sleeve top.
Awesome. And so this is your army tank cake today. What other cakes? What's your favourite cake that you've ever had?
The zombie with the exploding brains.
Ah, did you find that one hard, Helen?
I did actually. I'm not very good at piping.
Yes.
What's piping?
When we did the brains, and I think I
Like
might have
sausages.
probably had the icing a little bit too thin to make really good swirly brains.
Did you love it?
Either way, it's delicious.
I think the brains look unbelievable, don't they? It's
Frankenstein was
cool
pretty
cake.
good last
Yeah,
year
Frankenstein.
too.
Was that last year?
Yeah, he was pretty good. I
He's
enjoyed
a-
that one.
So you're a big long-term fan of Cake to the Rescue. You've been using it a long time, Helen.
So I think we worked out it's about probably since you started. The first cake we made was the iPhone cake,
Yes. And that's one of the first ones I ever designed.
and the boys had a lot of fun telling me which apps to make for the iPhone cake. And then after that, we started
That's
just
when we were
choosing.
little.
You were little, choosing cakes off the website. So the boys, about a month or so before their birthday, go through the website and just have a look and come up with a few options.
Yeah.
Remember
Awesome.
when-
And I usually pick ones that are all butter icing, not fondant.
Yes. Because they taste the best as well. I just think they taste so much better when they're all icing. I know that if we made them all out of fondant, they'd have that real professional baker's look. But I honestly think that they just taste so much better when they've got lots of icing on them. And what's the point in having an awesome birthday cake if no one wants to eat it?
Exactly.
And so we
Then
tend
you
to.
can just look at it.
Yeah, that's right. But we
Then
so we
it goes
tend to.
moldy.
We tend to like to try and do an awful lot of butter icing on our cakes because people like them a lot more. They're a lot more delicious. Just about finished that. What's your trickiest thing about icing, Helen? What's the bit that makes you the most nervous?
I think it's just making sure I don't get crumbs in it.
Yes, you get
And
worried
some of
about
those
the
sort of like
crumbs.
curved shapes.
Yes. The trick with it is really having a lot of icing on your spatula all the time. So in other words, so that you're never really spreading, you're
Yeah.
gliding over the top and then taking all the excess off. So it's kind of like you put lots on and then you can take it all off afterwards. And that way you never really have the crumb issue. The hardest issues genuinely are doing all these little shapes, and you kind of have to forgive yourself for a few crumbs on those. I do know some people that pre-crumb a cake and then put it in the fridge, but our cakes are supposed to be designed to get in there, get it done, and get out of there, so we don't really have those
Do you
steps in ours.
Would you like push it over like that so it's not all lines?
Yeah, we will do in a minute.
Okay.
We get all this edge bits off. Do you know, look, I've already got some crumbs there. So you can see I've got crumbs there, so I'm just going to do that.
Still.
I'm going to pop it on the side, and then I'm going to take a little bit more over the top. The biggest thing is to pick the crumb off as well. If you've got a crumb section, don't try and ice over it. Actually take it off and remove the bit. And the corners are always a little bit of a nightmare. So I always like to fill out the corner quite fat, like that, so that you can see that you've definitely covered it all. And then you can come in. The other thing I might do when I get to the end like this is I'll just take a butter knife and clean it up with a butter knife. Look at all that extra there.
Wow.
See?
That would have been a good piece of cake to have. Because it's all about the icing.
It's all about the icing. So we just need to fill in that. You see that little gap in the corner from where the cake was curved. Fill in that one.
Lou is good at this.
I may have done it once or twice before. Do you know what? In 5 years of having Cake to the Rescue, I've made over 200 cakes, which is 40 cakes a year, which is basically kind of one a week, which is quite a lot really.
That's nice.
In the end. I hate it when Craig gets in close because he gets to see all my mistakes. You see him? He's right in there, checking me out.
Just makes us all feel better. If you make mistakes too.
Absolutely.
Don't be mean.
So, we've got some little bits and pieces. We might finish this off and then we'll come back to you to show you how to do the turret. So we've just finished icing off the bottom, and I was just showing Helen a quick tip that I do. So once your icing's there and it's firmed up a little bit, it can be quite rough, but I've just smoothed it off showing Helen. So what I actually do is I go around the edge. Now, bearing in mind it has to already, can you see that bit's not as wet? It does have to have dried a little bit. It's also quite a good thing to do even when you've finished decorating your whole cake. You can kind of go around and do this. But I just go around and catch all the bits off the edges. I know people do it with water sometimes, but I find that I put too much water on and it puddles and I get little wet bits and slippy bits and white bits that go a little bit white if they've got too much water on them. So I tend to just literally go around with my hands. Bearing in mind you're going to put lots of other things on. If this was just a plain cake, you'd want it to be all thing, but we're going to put lots of bits and pieces on. Okay, so now we're going to ice the turret. And yes, I'm as nervous as you are. These are always those bits on those 3D cakes that you think, oh my God, it's going to be all crumbs. So, I'm by no means a real expert on this, but I'm going to show you what I do. The first thing is, I use a butter knife. I always call this a butter knife. I don't know if you guys call this, would you call it a butter knife? I think some people call it, it's just the knife you use for your dinner. But basically, a smaller knife with no sharpness. And basically we're going to do exactly the same thing, that you put a massive amount on the top. It's the same principle of wanting to cover all the crumbs before you ever start spreading. So you kind of create this big mass. And can you see that we're not going to get crumbs in it because it's so much icing that's covering the crumbs? And that way, if we get the whole thing majorly covered over, it means that then when we clean it up, the crumbs are already hidden underneath all the icing. And I think there's a temptation as you're going along to shape out sections of it to look more like they're supposed to, but it's actually better if you don't. Sorry, I probably should have got a spoon for this part. So we're going to push it all over. James is my little cheerleader. Anything that goes wrong, he's like, don't worry, Lou. It's okay, Lou. So can you see it really is quite thick and quite messy, but we're not worrying about the crumbs at all. And you can see, so we've covered this entire thing. So we've got this great big blob. And so now the entire thing is covered in icing.
It's all pointy.
And good to go. So what you can also do is you can let that sit for a second. So in other words, that gives it a chance to soak into the icing and kind of settle itself in. And then next thing we'll then do is clean this whole thing up. So I'm going to start by cleaning the top up and just go really, really gently and put it in the bowl. And then I'm going to do the front edge. You can see there's already a bit there. So we're going to do that edge. And there's actually more of this here where that slope is. But if you just take it off bit by bit so that there's not a huge temptation. Then we're going to come around this side. You're going to go gently over the corners. You barely want to touch the corners. And you smooth it all off. And then we do another one. And it's also about making big sweeping movements. Can you see? Nice big smooth movements. And then we're going to come on this side. Just going to run my way around here. There's always a lot more excess than you realise. It's only when you start taking it off. And if you don't take it off, the problem is in an hour's time, it'll take itself off. Because gravity takes over. So it's really important to get the extra bits off. Well, you're done.
Awesome.
So now we're going to put all of the camo onto our tank. And so we're going to show James how to best use the fondant. So the first thing is that you really need to knead the fondant over and over until it gets warm. This takes all the cracks out of it and makes it a lot better. And if the warmer it is, the more malleable it'll be and the less cracks that you'll get. The other thing is I think this kit comes with 4 packets of brown icing, but if you open everything straight away, then they'll slowly dry out while you're working on some. So only open what you need. Or the other thing that I do is I get out a snap lock bag, and if I've got leftovers, I put them in the snap lock bag, and that way they don't dry out. Is that what you do too? Yeah, and it's much better, and that way when you're using it, it doesn't dry out, especially if you're doing like the emoji cakes or something like that, where you're doing tiny little fiddly bits. It's best to keep all the fondant. So is it got nice and warm now?
I don't know.
Have a feel my one.
I don't know.
Perfect. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cut out all the camo. I think some people might get slightly freaked out that there's no template for the camo. The reason being is that it's supposed to look irregular and all different little bits. And so it's much better just to cut it. So yep, so you can see we've got it on our baking paper. We're going to roll it out. This is your fondant icing kit. If you find that you need to put a little bit, if your rolling pin's getting a little bit sticky, you can put a little bit of icing on it. It's just a really small amount.
I usually put a lot.
Yeah, just to take the edge off it. Okay, so now we've rolled out our brown fondant. Now the things to remember with rolling out your fondant is that when we're making this camo, we don't really want it to sit really thick on here. We want the tracks to be nice and thick, but we want the camo to blend in. So we've made it quite thin. You don't want to make it so thin that you can't pick it up, but thin enough that you can kind of push it in and it looks flush. So now we're going to cut out some pieces of camo. So you can cut out any shapes you like. Again, what you want to do is hold your knife high, not this way, and we just want to cut out splatters. Some this big, some smaller, and we're going to cut lots of bits out. So what we might do is just show you how to do these pieces. So peel all this back.
Cool.
Gonna peel that off and keep them there. And now this is the trick. What we want to do is, we'll get you to try it, James. What you want to do is run your finger round the edges. I'm going to do this one in the middle. And what it does is it takes all the roughness off and catches any cut parts. So that's it. So just really lightly, like you're tickling the edge. And if you get any bits that are looking like, see how this bit's done this, you can just pat them back in and roll them a little bit. And I know it sort of seems like an effort, but I promise you all these tiny little things are the things that make everything look really, really well finished when you do them. So we've done those ones, so let's move our cake in. Now you can be really random with this. The biggest thing is you can see that the tracks are going to go here, so we can have them a little bit under the track, but the tracks is right, and we don't want to put anywhere the wheels are. So you can grab some bits and I'll grab some bits, and you might bend them over the edge. I'm also going to press it right into the cake.
Can they be like up there?
Yeah, and over the edge. Perfect. And then you want to push it into the cake because the camo is part of the icing. It's not on top of it, so you're kind of pushing it into it. So you can see how we've done them, and we're going to do a whole load more, and we'll show you what it looks like when we've got all of the camo on. Come check out my camo cake. So as you can see, we've now got it all covered in its camo. It looks super cool, and we are ready to put on the track wheels.
Yeah.
So the track wheels are really easy. We've made the icing a little bit thicker because we want to make sure they keep their shapes. And we're going to cut out, you can go ahead and cut out your shape. So cut it down, do a twist. Yep, and lift it up. And then on to the next one. By doing the twist, you don't get the rough edge so much. You probably don't have to press quite as strongly as Strong Army James. Just do a little twist.
There's always pancakes for breakfast.
Okay, so now we've cut out the circles, and now we want to put a little mark in the center to make it look like you've got the wheel. So you can see there's a blunt edge and a sharp edge. You have to make this wheel thick enough that when you put the imprint in, it doesn't cut it or make it impossible to lift up. So I'm going to pick the first one. The other thing is you want to make sure you've got it in the center. So pop it on the top, have a look down and check it's centered. And then you just press it really, really lightly. So it only marks it, and then you lift it up.
That is cool.
So check.
Okay, so the other thing people often say is, I can't get the fondant to stick to the cake on the sides. Especially, we spent a lot of time making the camo, so now the icing has got pretty dry. So what I always say to you is moisten the back of the thing. So you really don't want to get it really wet. So when it's for my family at home, I just lick the back. Or I spit on my finger and I put it around, put it on. But if you're having kids for a party, maybe not the best idea. So you can use a pastry brush, but it is literally, I'm not even kidding, a skerrick of water. A tiny, tiny amount. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to get them so wet. You could do another one. I don't want to get so wet that you end up with black water running down your cake. So it is a minuscule amount. And then what we do is for this one, we put 2 on the ends, because they're running around the runners, and so you put 1 on each end. No, yeah, just a tiny bit. Perfect. So that's our 4 wheels on. We're going to do the other side, and then we'll show you how to do the tracks. Alrighty, now we're going to put the tracks on our cake, and you can see that we've rolled it out. We actually want to put both tracks together so that these lines that you see match on both of the cakes. So we've rolled out a big section, and we're going to use the big knife and hold it upright again. It's got, this is section here, you can see it's the length of the track, but we need it to go over the sides. That's why it's got arrows on the template. So we've made sure that it's long enough, and we're actually going to cut from here all the way along to here. No pressure. High. Yeah, you can line it up. There you go. Okay, nice and slow. Yeah, beautiful. Look at you go. That's it. And right to the end, making sure you stay straight all the way to the end. Oh, nailed it. So now, when it comes to, you can see that as we've done it, we've got a little bit wider here, so we'll just take that bit off there. Now, if you've done this, and we'll lift it up a little bit, can you see you get these little marks there that aren't always as thingy? You can just run it with your knife. So if you have any bits that look a little bit rough, just tap them with your knife. Now, the trick to the tracks is not to use the front side of the knife, it's to use the back side. This one's a really fat knife, so I'm not going to use this one. Actually, I will use the back of this one because it's longer. But what we're going to do is we're just going to put, now the trick is to go through it and make a mark, but you don't want to make a mark that makes it impossible to pick it up.
Okay.
So you want to go through it and rock it. You've got to make sure that you get the mark on both, and you want to make them roughly even. Actually, if you look at the original one, I wasn't that even that day when I made it. But yeah, so you can pop it down and just rock it a little bit. So you can see that we've made enough indent in it, but there's still enough thickness that we're not going to be having a problem picking this thing up. Perfect. So then what also happens is then you can see that it pushes the edge, so I tend to just go and knock the edges back again to make them smooth, and then we're done. So this is quite hard to lift up, and you always run that risk of it falling in the middle. You know, you lift up the middle and it all falls through. So what you want to do is you want to get your cake as close to it as you possibly can. And the other thing you want to do before James does it is you don't want to just lift it up from the 2 ends because it will fall in the middle. So what you want to do is get it nice and close and lift it over. You can even get a second person to help you. And then you want to run it on the ends. Make sure you get up against the edges.
And then do you want to cut it off? And
then run it around. So the thing that I was teaching James today is that if you cut it too close and in, all the icing will come out of the bottom. So it's much better to cut it downwards instead of inwards. And then just gently with your knife, tap it. And you want to get that kind of curved, you know, that little curved edge. So there's our first one. And then all we need to do is, after we finish, we'll put a little line along the bottom that'll give the other part of the track. So we'll do the other side and we'll come back and show you it. Alrighty, so as you can see, we've now finished our tracks, and we've put a little brown run along the bottom so that it looks like you can see the corner of the underside. See, All mums, don't touch the cake. Don't do it. So now we're going to make the gun. So the thing about the gun is you've got this really long skewer, because if your gun's going to stick out so much, you don't want it to tear through the cake. So you actually need it at an angle. So we're going to pop it in so we can judge it. You push it all the way in at the angle, and you can see that that's now going to be a bit long.
Really good.
But rather than cut it and guess what it is, it's better to put it in the cake and then say, okay, I think I want my gun to be about this long. Then take it back out,
Just get a knife.
and then you can cut it. It's actually, there you go. And you can break it off the bit, but you want to kind of cut it first. So you can see that's how long it's gonna be when it goes in. The next thing that we need to do is we're just gonna make this little landing ground in the front of it, which is just a little section. So it's not really worth having a template for it, because it'll just tear. So we're just going to form a little box. The way I form a box is I roll a sausage, I flatten it,
What are you doing?
and then I take in the ends like that. And that's what makes the little box shape. You're kind of keeping your hands square, and you just keep flattening it, and it makes the little box. So this is our little landing ground. So we're going to put it here, and then we're going to put it through, and it sits here. Now we need. Thank you, love. I've had some practice. And now we're going to make the sausage for the gun. Do you want to make the gun sausage?
Okay.
So when you make your sausage, a lot of people get annoyed with sausages because you get little cracks and things in them. It's all about having it, constantly molding it over and over. So you only want it this length, this long. So you want it to be fatter. So basically, can you see that you end up with no cracks in it if you're just constantly going back to it? So if you keep doing yours, 2-second rule.
The floor's clean.
2-second rule. Yeah, you can do that in my house. Okay, 2 seconds. So you can see that you get this nice smoothness of it. So if you keep getting cracks, don't worry, just keep going back to it. Keep doubling it over and keep molding it. I'm going to take this back out of here and push it in. Now you need to make sure you get it in the center.
Damn it.
And you also don't want to get it so close to the end, because, and then you can roll it again. You want to hold it up and check that it's close enough to the end that it doesn't fall over.
No droopy
There.
sausage.
Then what we want to do is we want to just take a tiny little ball
Ball.
on the end there and just flatten it onto the end. And then you can roll it again, and that all that's doing is making the end of the one. Perfect. Put this baby back on. Pop it back in. Let's put it all back in
Droopy
where it
sausage.
belongs. And pop it back on. Alrighty, so the last thing we're going to do is put, I've forgotten what you said this is called again.
Hatch.
We're going to put the hatch in. Because we're going to push this guy in, if we just push him in, you're actually going to see all the crumb in the cake. So I know it seems a little bit over the top, but what we're going to do is we're going to make a black hole so that when you push him inside, you see a black shadow, and the hole will look more believable. So what we need to do is use our middle one, yep.
That's so funny.
It's like we're cutting through stone. Okay, and we're going to pop that in the middle, up the top. So we'll pop it in here.
Can you win it?
No, because it's on the top and you can just push it down. And because it's a hole, we want to push it down into the cake. That's it. So it's flat in. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make the hatch for the top.
Oh yeah, in a circle.
And we need to make it quite thick because it's going to be a ring and then we have to pick it up.
Big one and,
So what we're going to use is use the bigger one first.
and then this one in the middle.
Actually, we're going to use the little one
Okay.
in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah, get it to the center and then cut it out. Perfect. Give it a twist. Let's have a look. All right. Then you have to pick it up. It might be easier actually to pick it up all at the same time, and just when you get it close to the cake, take the circle out and then you can just lay it on the top.
And then eat this.
And then the last thing that we have to do, put his arms up in the air so that you can push him in. Straighten this guy over. Put him in the middle. And he can either be surrendering or he can be more in control. And put his arms down. And that's it. Thumbs up. You
Beautiful.
absolutely nailed it. We've had so much fun at Kitchen Crash today. It's been awesome. And James is proof that boys are definitely awesome in the kitchen. Give me a high five. You smashed it, buddy.
Well done.
Awesome. We've done our Kitchen Crash.
With Skipper!
Oh,
Take 75. Skipper's